Everybody, welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday. I'm Peter Walsh, one of the clergy here at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. And instead of being in the usual spot, you've got me at my desk, and I'm here to introduce to you the pod that's coming. The podcast that you're about to see, that is, if you're on YouTube or about to hear, if you're catching this through an ears-only take on it, is a podcast in which Elizabeth and I covered the great 3 days, the Triduum, that is Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of Holy Week. It's at a time just after Father Justin Crisp left and before John Kennedy came. And so it's just the two of us. When we produced it 2 years ago, we were unable to get it out because, of course, we're a parish church. We have a lot going on. So now out of the vault comes a podcast that explains a bit about these 3 holy days and also a bit about how we live them out liturgically in the Episcopal Church. So I hope you enjoy it. We certainly had a good time putting together, and now one from the vault.
Welcome back, friends, to Rev'd Up for Sunday. In this case, we are getting revved up for Holy Week and the Triduum. That's Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and the Easter Vigil. And we are the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And I'm Peter Walsh.
So today we're going to refer to the scriptures, mainly the Gospels of Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and the Easter Vigil. And Maundy Thursday has the extra important reading from Corinthians. So maybe we can talk about that too, where we have the institution of the Holy Eucharist.
Yeah, I think that the great 3 days here, that we spend so much of our time in church, in some sense, splashing around the edges of Jesus and the theology of what's going on with Jesus. And now here on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, we plunge, into the depths. I mean, this is like going out to sea. Mm-hmm. And just to say that in our liturgies, we ritualize certain things that happen on this Thursday night, and it's the Last Supper. A tremendous amount of our scriptures is about the Last Supper, as you point out in some of the other previous podcasts. Communities like us that do the Holy Eucharist, we spend a lot of time there. Mm-hmm. So why don't we start there as something that we ritualize, and that does come from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, where we get the words of institution, right?
Right.
And on the night before he died for us, our Lord Jesus Christ took bread, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Mm-hmm. These pieces and parts. And I just think that we take that very seriously in our tradition. It is the spiritual food and sustenance of our gathering community.
Yeah.
Extraordinarily important to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's our most important, together with baptism, one of our 2 most important sacraments. And I love, Tad Guzzi has a great book, The Sacramental Basics. I bet you have that book on your shelf somewhere.
I don't.
Well, it's sort of
somebody please buy that book for me. No, I'm kidding.
It's a good book. But he talks about ritual really as it all begins with experience. It all began with the disciples' experience of Jesus alive, and also walking with Jesus and living with Jesus. And their lived experience became the stories they told afterwards, and the stories they told became festivals and feasts and practices. We ritualize a story. So before we go too far, I just want to say that our practice of the Holy Eucharist and that institution of the Holy Eucharist, even at the time of Paul, was already a ritualized story based on a real lived experience with Jesus. And as soon as we lose the story, we lose the moorings of our ritual. And so Holy Week and all this, it's a way for us to reconnect and relive in more deeply, I think, to these stories. So on this night, like you're saying, in Maundy Thursday.
And in our ritualization is to be the vial by which that we are able to enter in and taste the aliveness of our Lord. Mm-hmm. I think that we are the disciples gathering, and even in John's Gospel, where we get the beloved disciple leaning up against Jesus, remembering that they didn't sit at tables like we're sitting in. They lounged because in antiquity they thought it was better to digest by lying down, and so they would have these large pillows. But that we are, in some sense, the beloved disciple nestling in next to Jesus. But that it is a completely shocking thing. The Eucharist thing is shocking. It is shocking.
Yeah.
And and for some people it makes no sense. And I think that this is, speaking of great books, this is a great book.
That one too,
Love
yeah.
Set Free, Martin Smith. And I was just gandering at it just before I walked across. And the shocking nature about what Jesus is doing, where he is saying, my body is bread. I mean, imagine you go to a dinner, you go to a Passover Seder, you go to a dinner party, and somebody says, my flesh is bread. And back in John 6:53-57, he says, very truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood have eternal life, and I will raise them up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me, and I in them. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so whoever eats me will live because of me. I mean, this is shocking stuff.
Yeah.
He is saying, consume this, and you're consuming my life and my life in the Father. And this is about union and communion from the inside out. It's incredible stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's complete upturning of everything they'd ever known about that meal. Because I think that the meal didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, they were practicing a Jewish meal.
Yeah.
Jesus is completely kind of subverting what it's all about, and that's an intense book. That I have that book too, and it's amazing. I mean, it's a new Jesus. In other words, it's a covenantal meal to begin with God and Israel. To have bread and wine to look forward to the coming of the Messiah. And Jesus is saying, here's a new covenant. As he does so much especially in John, it spells out that way. I give you something new. So he's giving them this whole new way to understand what they're doing in that moment. And at the moment, they have no idea because he hasn't died and risen yet. But they'll go back and remember what he was saying. And then when he says, eat this to remember me, later on, they're going to say, "Oh, this is what he meant." That we are his body.
Yeah, interesting about the covenantal meal, because it's a Seder, and that is the covenantal meal. But it depends on people in our tradition where they lean in on it, and there is a whole portion of the tradition that says this is all about remembrance, and so we're getting together to remember Jesus. And I'm completely on the other side of that, which is this is about mystical experience. We may remember but remember, remember, we are remembering ourselves. We are joining ourselves in membership with him, and that the bread and wine of Holy Communion is union in communion. That's the primary thing that it is.
I mean, in a sacred mystery, it's all the things, right? It's not either or. Things. But I think I was speaking to the story in John where they're getting this meal from Jesus. In the story, he's sharing this meal with them in John and giving them this new covenant meaning. So at the moment, they're not fully aware of what they're doing until after the resurrection. But,
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
and then of course it's mystical
100%.
experience and everything. But to me, it's important, this recasting of the meaning, because as soon as even Paul is writing in Corinthians, they're forgetting why they're gathered and what it's for and what it's really doing for them. I mean, it's detached from the story, like as soon as 50 years on, and I think, one person's getting drunk and some rich people are boasting about all they have while others are in need. And, Paul's trying to wait a second, this is the body of Christ. You are gathered into the body of Christ, becoming what you're receiving here. It's to make you one. There's no longer Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. It's super important that they understand this the new covenant, and what the body and blood is. So that's why I keep emphasizing that. I just feel like
it's all true. So, I mean, we find in the meal, right? So, in John's Gospel, we have we have the longest prayer that Jesus says. I mean, there's so much in that Last Supper that we don't touch on here. We don't touch on it on Maundy Thursday, the night of the institution. But we do touch on and ritualize the washing of the feet.
Yeah.
Right, and that is something that, in a funny way, is. He says, do this also as an example of who I am to you. But it's really interesting to me because that passage which we read, but we don't live out only because we wear shoes now, right?
Right.
We don't wash our feet in that way. Though I must say, there is nothing more amazing than going to a mosque and doing the ablutions in the mosque where you take your shoes off, you wash your feet, and you wash your hands and you wash your face, and then you go up barefooted into the sanctuary. We had a friend, as you know, visiting with us, a Druze man, and I was talking to him about the first time I went into a mosque in New York City with my son Ben, and we went down in the basement to do the ablution so that we could come in to the mosque, and we were seated next to a New York City policeman. We were all taking our shoes off, and I'd been to other mosques in the Middle East, but there is something about that cleansing. But Jesus is talking about the washing of the feet as an example of servanthood, right? But I might also say that when he gets to that, he says, Jesus knew that his hour had come. So back to your introduction about the Triduum, I mean, the hour is here. And in John's Gospel, that's super loaded up, that the time is now, because this is why he's come into the world. Right. For this hour.
Yeah. Right. It's so many things. I mean, it's Jesus teaching, quintessentially teaching his disciples. And then at the end of it, he says, do you understand what I've just done? And so it's like the quiz.
No is the answer.
Yeah. They're like, it made us really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I love James Allison, and he has a great breakdown sort of many of the various ways that they might understand what he's doing, or that he might be intending to allude to based on their own tradition. And of course, as we most commonly understand it, it's as you said, it's a gesture that a host's servant would make for his guests coming into a meal, and the servant would wash everyone's feet as a gesture of, welcoming and courtesy, relief from whatever journey they took to get there. And in this case, it's Jesus, the host, welcoming his guests to his own feast. And a second way might be that, on the other hand, in the Middle East at that time, the one time a host would wash someone's feet is he would wash his own wife's feet. And it's got sort of a marital connotation.
Wow. I didn't know that. I like that.
Yeah,
That's
and
cool.
that a host a man of the house would wash his wife's feet as a gesture of intimacy, humility, equality, things that aren't necessarily lived out at that time, but it would be, like something you might do on a Sabbath or something. And if the highest order in marital harmony.
Oh, interesting.
But it has,
really interesting.
Yeah. And so when we have
before.
the idea of Jesus, the bridegroom of his church, in John, there's sort of an allusion to church, and already at that time, they might have that symbolism. And then, and also, of course, it's a posture of being under someone's feet. You're it's humility. You're putting yourself in a position of vulnerability, of like being kicked, or, you're willing to serve even the one who will stab you in the back or kick you or can't be trusted, someone who can't be trusted. And I think sometimes we use Psalm 41 around this time where it says, even my bosom friend has lifted his heel against me. And, there's Judas in the midst of them, and Jesus washes his feet. So it's Jesus willing to go all the way to serve even those who really can't be trusted, and that the church, that's our mission too. And then finally, it alludes to maybe a rite of initiation, the high priestly function of washing the newly ordained. And so when you think of Peter's exchange with Jesus here, you can't wash my feet. Jesus says, if I don't wash you, you have no share with me. And so in a way, maybe it's allusion to the share of priesthood. And so there's so many. John, this is the genius of John, is the multivalenced meanings in every single scene in this gospel. I mean, there's not even enough time to go into all the scenes.
No.
I thought I would share that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's very, very interesting, just to open that up for us a little bit more. And Peter is, of course, being Peter, when he says, you'll have, no...
Sure.
You're not going to wash my feet.
Yeah.
It doesn't work this way, kind of thing.
Right.
And how many times Peter gets it wrong is really great. And particularly the question of Peter and John, we'll get to that further down the line. Peter, there's always this weird thing in John's gospel where Peter and John, the beloved disciple, are sort of battling here.
Right, exactly.
So then out of this, after he sits them all down and tries to explain to him what he's doing, we get the new commandment.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the only commandment that Jesus gives us. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. That's the summary of the two sentences. But by this people will know that you are my disciples. Mm-hmm. And I mean, hey, love is written all over the Hebrew scriptures, right? This and the difference here, and written all over the New Testament. But the difference, the commandment here is for Jesus' followers to love as Jesus loved, that it's Jesus love. And we would say that the very purpose of the ministry that we have as a gift, Paul would say that we have in clay jars, is to love as Jesus loves. It's Jesus' love that we love with, not our own loves. It's Jesus' love. It's the new commandment love. Yeah. And there is no doubt that churches that tend to do well are churches where people can identify them as people who love one another, be communities of love. This is the ecclesia which Paul talks about. It's vivified by the love of Christ. That's what gives it its spiritual content.
Right. And I think that's where all the nuances and the many meanings come into play, because it's not just love one another as I have loved you. It's love one another, especially, and even those like Judas or any of us who would betray or be betrayed, and all the people who would, who really we can't trust. And we prefer the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. It's just a little bit less radical than as I have loved you.
That's
it's sort
interesting.
of, we don't spend a lot of time really dwelling on that extra degree of love that's so demanding and so radical.
I agree. And it seems to me that there are things that might be part of our liturgy, brought into our liturgy, that this would be something, this would be two sentences that could be brought into the every Sunday Christian liturgy.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a reminder and a call to the community how to be. So, and then we have, as we move forward here to in our church, it's essentially what is happening is we're mimicking the Last Supper, as we say that, or the scriptures tell us that with a hymn they went out to the Garden of Gethsemane, and then you might say with a hymn, and so you might say a word about about the stripping of the altar and the movement to the vigil and what's happening there.
Sure, I mean, So at the end of Maundy Thursday is to tell everybody, remind everyone, and some of you who haven't attended this great service, but at the end of Maundy Thursday service, we celebrate the Holy Eucharist, and then we strip away everything that's on the altar in the church, every shred of linen, every candlestick, every altar rail cushion, and all the furniture on the altar and around the altar that. So the altar is laid bare, and at the end you scrub the altar, and the church goes dark, and the reserved sacrament is all taken to what we call the altar of repose, and it's in this case in our little chapel set up like the Garden of Gethsemane, and there people sign up. People like our parishioners, whoever wants to sign up to stay awake 1 hour with Jesus overnight, like it says in the gospel.
Could you not stay awake for 1 hour?
Yeah.
Right.
And
no is the answer that the disciples give. Resounding no.
Yeah, it's like, we tried. But we take the consecrated host over there as the presence of Christ there. And then it's an all-night vigil, which ends really, technically, I guess, at sunrise on Good Friday.
Yeah, so we then pick it up. Churches primarily pick this up with a service at noon, and with the reading of the Passion narrative. And then churches from particular liturgical traditions have that passion narrative as John's passion narrative. And just maybe to say a quick word that all of the Gospels agree that Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane, that he had the prayer and the agony, that he was arrested, and went to Caiaphas' house. But let's talk a little bit about John's passion narrative. I mean, it's different. It emphasizes some different things. Matthew follows Mark, and so we really get Jesus as victim there. We get Jesus as humanity. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Psalm 22. And then in Luke, we get a more serene Jesus. In Luke the doctor loves the compassionate Jesus. We get Jesus on the cross, caring for the good thief. I always loved that.
Yeah.
The good thief, right? And Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And he commends his prayer. But in John, if Luke moves this way, in John we get Jesus fully in charge. He rules,
very intentional,
rules the world, and from the cross. And I just might, if you don't mind, my reading one thing about that. And this is from when the passage where Jesus is talking about the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd, and he tells us. He said, "I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father." So Jesus in John's gospel is in control, and he's in control on that cross.
100%. Yeah, even starting the night before at Maundy Thursday, the language is the same. He lays down his robe, and then he takes it up again.
Right.
There's just so much foreshadowing and all of that. And he's very deliberate in all of these scenes.
Yeah. And so as the gospel unfolds, as the solemn reading of this, I'll just point out again, we start on Thursday night, really. Here we read that Thursday night passage in the vigil, but here we get that's for the vigil passage. And there's some particularity here that's not in some of the others, where we have Peter cutting off the slave's ear, but it says the slave's name was Malchus, which I love. This is, you get this particularly, this is what happened. And then instead of Jesus saying the live by the sword and die by the sword line, which we talked about in Matthew's gospel, he says, "Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?" So, we get that. And then, of course, he's off to Caiaphas. But now there is an ambiguity here, because he goes first to Annas and then to Caiaphas. And just a word about that.
Yeah.
And so Annas was the high priest up to the year 15, and then the Romans took him out, and his son-in-law Caiaphas became the high priest, though Annas still clearly had, he was the power behind the power, because they bring Jesus to him first. And so in this case, in John's gospel, we have the interrogation of John broken into two pieces, one with Annas. And it's a little unclear in the gospel where Annas lives. Does he live with Caiaphas, or there's a whole thing that says he lives in another spot? But
Caiaphas in John is famously saying it's better for one man to die than for the whole nation to be destroyed. And it's so important in John that he repeats it at this scene. In the Passion narrative. It says, Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was better to have one person die for the people. So we have this whole scapegoating thing going on.
Yeah, it's so cool that you brought that up, because now this is actually, okay, so yes, the scapegoating thing, which is something that you're always so good about identifying for us. You teach us over and over and over about scapegoating. You should never stop teaching us, because we need to hear it over and over and over. But also, the tradition has it that in that moment, Caiaphas was actually a prophet. He's telling the truth. Jesus is going to die for the whole nation and for the world.
Yeah. I mean, for the wrong reasons.
For the wrong reasons, but on the crucifix, it's going to say over the King of the Jews, and it's going to be written in Latin and Hebrew. Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. So that's the whole world. So in some sense, for the wrong reason, he got it right.
Yeah, it's a motif in John for all the wrong people to be saying all the right things for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
right. Yeah, it's true. Oh, and also I'd point out in John, all those ego eimi passages that I am the bread of life, I am the good shepherd, I am the way, the truth, the life. Here, Judas is going to betray him, and Jesus, knowing all that was to happen, came forward. This is when all the soldiers show up with Judas. And for whom are you looking? And Jesus says, and they answered, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus says, I am he. Ego eimi. So that's like the climactic ego eimi.
And the soldier, and they all fall down when he identifies himself. They all fall down.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a scene.
They stepped back and fell to the ground.
Yeah. No,
So, and then they ask him again. He says it again. Yeah, it's so, I hope people will listen closely in this reading, because there's so many little things like that in the Passion reading that, I mean, to me, that the scapegoating thing and, the way that the trial plays out, I think the reason I wanted to start today's podcast with this importance of the story that we remember in our enactment is super important to remember, because if it just becomes a ritual apart from the story, we end up being like Caiaphas. We end up like interpreting our stories in ways that really just are like the people who put Jesus to death, for all these wrong reasons. Because I think Jesus is always pointing to the fact that, he is the victim of this sacrifice that he wants to end. He wants to end this practice of putting someone to die, to death, so we can live in peace. And so anyway, it's too much to say right now. But I do think that the reading of John, because it's such a later gospel, has much, much more understanding in their community, or a more heightened, refined understanding of what's happening here, and it's written into the way that the story is told. So they're developing their theology more and more by the time of John. So that's just one of the, I said a lot to say a little thing, that John has a big theology written into the text in ways that Matthew, Mark, and Luke have different and less refined, I would say.
I think that the issues here, you said it, that you kept moving over the top of it, was whether or not we enter into the drama of the story. This is in lauding all of you who are hanging in here with the podcast, which is simply to say that the more we enter into our scriptures, the more we know them, the more we are able to live into our scriptures. This is the whole idea of Ignatian prayer, where you enter as a person into the prayer, into the scriptures. That's your prayer, that you come to get the feel of Jesus. And then the living Christ bursts into your life from the inside out. We might take these words in, but the lively word rises up in you. You can feel it in your being. You can feel it in your body. I mean, Jesus feels more and more real to you the more you plunge into it. And it's not just because you go to the movies on Maundy Thursday and watch the Passion of our Christ. Yeah. It's that you experience the Passion from the inside out, and so as we move through the drama from Thursday night, and I mentioned in the last podcast, they understand that Jesus spent the last night in the pit, and then on Friday he comes before. He comes before Pilate, and this conversation with Pilate is shocking. This is one of the great recorded conversations of all time, where, who's the boss here? Jesus is the boss, not Pilate. Pilate's full of fear, and Jesus is the authority, though he's the one. Jesus interviews him rather than the other way around, and Pilate keeps bringing him in, out. He's a man who
he's really back on his heels.
He's super on his heels.
Yeah.
He does not know what to do. What he needed is from Matthew's gospel to get his wife there to tell him it had nothing to do with this man, but his wife doesn't show up in this one.
To say more about Pilate, because it's that great, existential.
Pilate,
exchange.
Suffered under Pontius Pilate. The gospel describes Pilate's suffering.
I think so.
I mean, we definitely get that he suffered under Pontius Pilate here, that he was scourged and whipped and a crown of thorns and a purple robe and all that, and was ultimately crucified under Pilate's authority, even though the scriptures do everything to lay this thing on the Jewish authorities. For sure. And you spoke beautifully about that last time in our last pod.
And then he ends it all with, what is truth?
Oh yeah. Well, he doesn't even. That's not quite the end. But when he gets there, so we in the first portion of that, before we even get to this, what is truth? You get into the thing where he says, are you a king? And Jesus gives him the old, you say that I'm a king, which drives him crazy. He hates answers like this. Pilate, Jesus is a hard guy to put in a box. And then Jesus says, for this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. And then we get, Pilate says, what is truth?
Yeah.
But the amazing thing is, he then turns away from the one person in the world who can tell him the truth.
Right. It's incredible.
It's amazing.
When he says, so you are a king, I'm reminded of, learning Greek in seminary. I never learned the words for yes and no. Like, Jesus doesn't do yes and no questions at all. I was trying to find out, is there one place?
Well, he does say, let your yes be yes and your no be no, which he's really saying, let your yes, yes be yes and your no, no be no. But he's talking about other people not prevaricating on their moral. Remember, that was in the Sermon on the Mount when he was saying, when you give somebody your word, it's yes. Keep your word. Keep your word. That's what he was talking about there.
Right.
But Jesus.
But he answers with questions. He doesn't answer with yeses.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Go on. What are some more highlights of John? Because there's so many.
Okay, so I just another few of these, and I know we got Rob behind us trying to keep us moving, so the rest of you don't have to have a meal halfway through the podcast. Rob is signaling us that we're 30 minutes into this. Sorry, everybody, because we promised 35 minutes, and we're just getting started.
I'm passing by a lot of rabbit holes, just for the record.
Just for the record.
That I would like to go down.
Yeah, that's just, see, you have no idea that we're on fast forward, but we're on fast forward here. So here's a few things, okay? When he says, here is the man, in Latin, ecce homo, one of my favorite lines in the whole of the scriptures. And I've always thought that we should have an enormous icon at every church when you walk in that says ecce homo underneath it with the face of Christ. Ecce homo, here is the man. And the truth is, he is the man. And when he ecce homos him, he gets into this question here. He comes back in to the praetorium where he lives, and he says to him, do you not know that I have power to release you and the power to crucify you? I mean, he is fired up now. Pilate is climbing out of his skin. And Jesus, with great equanimity, answers him, you would have no power over me unless it was given to you from above. In other words, Jesus just, his fire is met by Jesus's water, which is like, you have no power over me. Right. It's just, boom.
Yeah.
Unbelievable conversation.
It is. It's just the iconic conversation in the Gospels, I think.
And so then we go out, it's at noon. He goes out to the pavement, right? And Gabbatha, and he washes his hands of it, basically, just as, we've talked about. And it's off to Golgotha. And it's interesting. We'll just say, in case anybody's confused, they can join me in my confusion that I keep looking up every other year, which is in Mark, it says he's on the cross from 9 to 3. In the other Gospels, he's on the cross from noon to 3. This is something that I used to scratch on. And it's just to point out that though all of our passion narratives have great agreement, there are things that they don't agree on. And one of those is the amount of time Jesus is on the cross.
Yeah. I'll just do a footnote about this is the only gospel where we get the exchange of Jesus and John at the foot of the cross, where Jesus hands over his mother to John. Yeah,
let's talk about the three last words there, and let's talk about that there.
It's just beautiful, and I think it's the only place we get this, where when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her. This is Jesus already hanging on the cross in his last gasps. He says to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." And then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. In the other three Gospels, Jesus' mother really drops out of the picture. And this is the one where she lasts all the way, at least as a known, identified Mary, she's there. So,
it's interesting. I mean, thank you for picking that out, because it's one of those things, particularly Johannine, what does it mean? I mean, is there a competition between a Johannine community and James's community in Jerusalem, or Peter's community, and maybe eventually toward Rome? Who's got the authority? Whatever it is, this guy John is an adopted son of Mary. He's a brother of Jesus in this transaction. And I remember Martin Smith in this great book, I think it was in this book, where he said, this is the beginning of the church. Not the Pentecost, this is the beginning of the church. I may be saying that I'm not so sure he said that, but I want to say he said that.
Yeah, it's great. It makes him a brother of Jesus. It's really incredible. I want to hear more about Mary after this point. But anyway, we can move forward if we need to.
And then we get, how about this? Just going through there's the 7 last words, and 3 of them are in John's gospel, and the other one's I'm thirsty, and that's to fulfill what it says. That's to fulfill what the scriptures say.
Yeah.
And that's only in John do we get I'm thirsty. And then at the end, he says it is finished.
Yeah.
And a word about that. I mean, I used to always think it meant that he was defeated.
I mean, in John, it's especially, decided Jesus is knowingly finished with his mission on earth. So it's not like spent, exhaust. He is all that, but I think in this particular gospel, it's saying something more, that it is accomplished, is maybe more what he's saying.
So that's a victorious kind of claim, not a defeated claim. That's a victory claim that he's done. And I think it points toward so much of the theology in John that points toward the power of the cross and the back to earlier when he's talking about and when I am lifted up, right? This is back to the question about the snakes in the desert during the book of Numbers and the healing power of the cross. And now Jesus is saying, it is done. It's completed.
Right. So on Good Friday, when it is finished, we venerate the cross. And that's a time when everybody can come and meditate at the foot of the cross and touch it and say prayers. And do you want to say anything about that?
I that sounds great. The veneration of the cross grew out of the early church when pilgrims would go to Jerusalem and they would begin to walk the way of the cross. They would come into that square out in front of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and kiss the cross, what was left of the cross of Christ, or was venerated as the cross of Christ. And over time, those pieces spread throughout the Mediterranean to other churches, and then in time, it spread to churches far and wide that didn't have any remnants venerated as the cross. But it was to say this is the healing. This is the healing nature of the cross, to come to the cross, and a tremendous amount of theology around that. And we see that also sometimes in icons with people kneeling at the foot of the cross, touching the cross. And then just to say, in those same icons, you might see, as Jesus as a dead man, where the centurion pokes him to make sure he's dead and out of his body comes water and blood, and just hearkening back to when Jesus said, out of the believer's heart shall flow streams of living water. And he is the stream of living water. It's it's about the cross. That's where we're just accessing ourselves. It's like power, like plugging into an electric cable. We're plugging into the power, the source, the cross, the life of Jesus on the cross. Anyway, so just a little bit about Holy Saturday, because there's an interesting thing in Holy Saturday, which is we have a collect that talks about Jesus's Sabbath rest in the grave cave, the cave grave, and everybody is home for the Sabbath. But we also have in our tradition some things about this. It says in 1 Peter, I'm forgetting the phraseology, but that Jesus was actually active while he was in that cave. And in the early Apostles' Creed, it comes out that he descended into hell, which we have in the Rite 1 portion of our prayer book, and in the Rite 2 portion of our prayer book, we have he descended into the dead, and different theologies about that. And one of them is the Orthodox theology is the harrowing of hell, which is Jesus setting everybody free. He goes down to collect Adam and Eve and everybody else and rise so that they can rise with him. And the other is that Jesus went down to suffer with those in hell. So it was the last place of his being in complete union with communion with the whole of the whole of the human journey. And now on to the vigil. Why don't you say something about the vigil and how that unfolds?
Well, okay. And just one word about Holy Saturday. In my practice of that, and in the prayer book, it's really in addition or apart from that idea, it's really the day of nothing. It's the day when Jesus is gone, absent from us, and we don't consecrate the Eucharist. We don't consume it. We don't do anything that day. Yeah. And it's the one day of the year we just don't have. I'm so grateful that you just said that. I mean, it's the day of silence with a big S. Yeah. This is where we know Jesus by his absence. It's the absence that helps us to know. It's the giant punctuation on the end. It's the longing heart in the silence of devastation. Yeah. So good. The deprivation. Nadir of our depth of pain and sorrow. And so that's the setup for Easter Vigil, because, before there was any of this, there was Easter. People had, any of the liturgies that we do, there was Easter, and Easter points back to all these things and gives them meaning and hope in the midst. And so the Easter Vigil is practiced as kind of the night turning into day. So people wonder, why do you do an Easter Vigil and celebrate Easter at night on Saturday? And normally it would be sort of in the middle of the night so the sun can come up, on Easter morning. But so we're civilized people. You have to go to bed. So there's Easter morning, which of course we'll cover in another podcast. But Easter Vigil is the end of the Triduum, the end point where the contrast between all we've been through as pilgrims through Holy Week. We've descended into the grave basically with Jesus, and at the Easter Vigil we kindle new fire. It's like life coming back out. Some ancient fathers of the church call Holy Week the sort of recreate a new process of creation into Easter, the 8th day, and so there's new fire, there's baptism, and baptism was a way of telling the story that we go into the waters of baptism as into the grave with Jesus so that we can be raised with him into new life. And that's Easter. And so everything springs out of Easter. Everything that we understand. Before there was anything else for the early church, there was the celebration of Jesus' resurrection in the Holy Eucharist and in baptism. So that's what the Easter Vigil really makes baptism central. And but anyway, the contrast is night to day, darkness to light, death to life. And so it's just an important experience, I think, if you're going all the way from Maundy Thursday to get all the way through to the Easter Vigil, because it's a pilgrimage all its own.
Yes, and it is your favorite service. Is that not right?
I love it. Yeah, but I wouldn't love it apart from these other ones as much, because it has even more impact when you've been into that very somber, very difficult study and pilgrimage, walking the way of the cross with Jesus and through his death and waiting through Holy Saturday to get there. So yeah, I love it. I think it's very powerful and beautiful. It's meditative and starts in the dark and ends in the light. So in this story, we move through the stories of salvation history, kind of trying to take the greatest hits and give us a little bing, bing, bing as we go across the Hebrew Scriptures, resulting in the gospel of the resurrection. Mm-hmm. And as the lights come on and Alleluia, Christ is risen, the Lord is risen indeed, is proclaimed in the midst of a great organ fanfare. Mm-hmm. We then hear the gospel. And this year, we hear the gospel in the evening, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John version, Matthew, Mark, and Luke versions of the resurrection. And all the resurrection narratives, as you know, are both similar and different. Right. There's clearly many, many different narratives around the resurrection. The first being actually in 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul lays out that who Jesus appeared to, and he says he appeared first of all to Cephas, to Peter, and we don't even have the story of that. And then another time he appeared to 500. But in Matthew's version of it, we get two Marys at the tomb, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, going to the tomb, not one. And then we get the earthquake, which was I'm now going to always associate with you because of our last podcast. You had a lot to say about the earthquake. This is the one time when we find out, we get an explanation of how was the tomb opened, and it was an earthquake is a godly movement here, and it's a sudden earthquake, and it's almost like rolling back the stone caused the earthquake. Is that what's implied here? Well, it says the angel. It says the angel rolled it back, which is great. I love it that these angels are jacked. They can move a 2,000-pound stone. I know. The angel rolls it back, and the angel has the appearance of lightning. This is something we talked a lot about, the Tabor light. This was the divine light that the angels had. And then only in Matthew's gospel do we have that the guards shook and became like dead men. I love that description. Right. It's incredible. Yeah, really fantastic. Yeah. And I think in all of them, there's a do not be afraid. I might be wrong about that, but I think every single one of these has that exchange where someone's telling the women to not be afraid, whether it's the angels or Jesus himself. It clearly, so they have fear. Clearly bumping confusion into the divine. We want the divine light, and clearly every time I get near, the first thing we have is fear. So, I mean, it's clear throughout the Scriptures. I think the other interesting thing is, and this is something that there's been a tremendous amount of ink typed onto or printed out on, is about where the resurrection takes place. Is it in Jerusalem or is it in Galilee? But in Matthew, we get to tell everybody to go to Galilee and I'll meet them there, right?
And then Jesus meets them. I love that. And suddenly Jesus met them and said, greetings. It's like, hello. Hey.
Right.
And then they worshiped him.
Right.
This is the one place where he's worshiped.
Yeah. So there you have it. Do you have any last words about the Triduum, or should we let our people go?
That's hilarious. Like we are Pharaoh holding you here into this podcast, and Rob and the Lord are saying, let your people go.
Exactly. Well, in all seriousness, this is really one of the most incredible experiences people can give themselves, is to walk with us through Holy Week and through this Triduum. So whether you do it by stream or in person, you're most welcome here. And we hope we can walk this way together, come out on the other side, forgiven, loved, and freed. God bless you.